Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. We're back in Miura land this time round. Miuras are sort of one of our stock in trades. We seem to fix a lot of them. And I've sort of done this a little bit the wrong way round, which you'll discover in a minute. But we restored the yellow Miura, which has gone to its happy new environment with its owner who bought it at auction, and then we did a complete ground-up restoration on that car. We've covered that in previous videos. Then we had the green Miura SV that we just finished as well, a complete ground-up restoration also, and that had one or two interesting modifications on it, done by Claudio Zampoli in the US. And he put a dry sump oil feed system on them to help keep the engine fed with oil, slightly important. And he also put some super wide wheels on the back, which gave it a very aggressive stance. People had mixed views on that, which is interesting, and I can perfectly understand that. But this brings us to this car, which is one of the first Miuras ever built. In fact, it's the 23rd Lamborghini Miura out of 762 constructed. It's finished in this rather startling colour, which Lamborghini called Rosso Miura. And as you can see, I'm not quite sure the lights will pick it up properly, but this is a sort of burnt orangey, orangey red, slightly red orange. It's a very difficult colour to pigeonhole this. But it was called Rosso Miura. Bertone presumably came up with the mix of this colour. And the reason why it's called Rosso Miura and is this colour is because Lamborghini didn't want Rosso to be Rosso because there was a company just down the road in Maranello turning out lots of Rosso cars. So they came up with this colour, which is quite patently not bright red, signal red. And this is Lamborghini's take in Miura speak on red. So lots of Miuras were painted Rosso. This was their preferred recommendation for the reasons I've explained. This is actually the colour that the Italian job Miura would have been. We went into this whole thing when we, Olivier Nemesh and Eric Brutin and myself authenticated the Italian job Miura in 2016. There were all sorts of conversations about the colour. This was the original colour of the car that was in the movie. This isn't it, obviously, but it was this colour. It's an amazing colour because it's not metallic, but it absolutely springs out at you when you put it in the sunlight. It really is an amazing colour. But one of the really interesting things about this car is it is, because it's the 23rd Miura built, it's very close to Giampaolo Dallara, Bob Wallace's, Paolo Stanzani, Ferruccio Lamborghini to a certain extent, once he'd sort of joined the Miura party after they'd presented him with this car outside working hours really as a project. This is very faithful to the original Miura vision. And I had the privilege of meeting Giampaolo Dallara, who is a simply amazing engineer. He's well into his 80s now. I had the pleasure of Olivier Nemesh and myself found a car for him, a Miura. After all those years, we actually brokered the deal with Gianpaolo Dallara on acquiring a dream Miura of his own a few years ago. But he specified and designed the chassis for this car, and the way he designed it was to be made out of sheet metal by folding and using a fly press to create holes in the chassis for lightning. All very simple first principle sheet metal fabrication really. And he designed the structure as a unibody construction, a monocoque. And the whole thing is welded up out of folded sheet sections. It's a work of genius, actually. But the original cars like this were the chassis material, the outer skin on the front and rear is aluminium, but the inner framework is steel, and the actual structure of the car, as I say, is sheet metal folded into sections. It was originally 0.9 millimeters thick, such as on this car, for the first 125 Miuras built. And it's quite interesting because that, they discovered that they could have a tendency to flex if they were if they were sort of jacked up in the wrong place or something like that, the chassis could flex. So after 125 cars, Giampaolo Dallara said, no, we're going to 1 millimetre instead of 0.9 on the thickness of the chassis. And the Series 2 P400 Miura was born. Then at the 200th car, they actually stiffened up the front cross member area a bit more to give it just a little more rigidity. But as it is, the chassis can slightly, I mean, a lot of objects such as aircraft wings and things move slightly, and this is no exception. But as I say, Dallara decided to spec it up to 1 millimetre. Then at the 200th car, they just stiffened it up a bit more. But the most strange thing is happening now. The market used to shun the early cars because they were regarded as inferior to the later cars, because the later cars are stronger, for want of a better way of putting it. But now these are coming into vogue, the Leggera cars, and I regularly speak with Olivier Nemesh, the Lamborghini historian and broker, and he is telling me now that demand for the Leggera cars is actually outgrowing the later P400 cars, and the prices, these are actually fetching more money than the later cars as well. I mean, these used to be the cheapest Miuras, the least valuable. Not anymore. It's very odd the way the market can change. I remember in the early noughties, a Ferrari Daytona was normally 2/3 the price of a 275 GTB Ferrari. Those days have gone. A Ferrari 275 is now worth 4 or 5 times the price of a Daytona. It's funny how the market dictates the same cars. You park the same 3 cars next to each other, P400, S, SV, and they could all have a relationship with each other in terms of value, and that actually is fluid. It changes over time. It's really bizarre, but welcome to the world of classic cars. This is a lovely car. We've had it in for a service. The interior was normally pretty shabby on the early Miuras. When they, around about 1968, they changed the interior. They upgraded the car, they stiffened the chassis, but they also changed the interior to make it look a bit more luxurious, because it was pretty ropey on the early cars. And that was because Lamborghini were thrown into chaos because they presented this car at the 1966 Geneva Motor Show, I think, and they weren't ready to productionize it. They weren't ready. So they were thrown into chaos. Bob Wallace covered lots of kilometers testing this on the Autostrada and the roads, the Futa Pass and around there in northern Italy. And they got it to the point where it was viable to be given to customers but the interior was a real letdown. This one, as a lot of them have been, is retrimmed in leather to improve on that. This is not unusual at all. It was quite common actually, and still is. But yeah, this is an interesting combination because it's not the original engine. It's a Miura S engine, which is slightly more powerful. So we have the combination of lightweight chassis, light body, and slightly more power than these had from the factory. And also, it's got the 9-inch rear wheels. It's got the Miura SV rear wheels. So this should be quite the thing to drive, actually. As I say, the 23rd Miura ever built. Very early, lots of early features on this car. But I shall, without further ado, balance the carburetors using my trusty hose pipe and screwdrivers, get all the harmonics on those right, get them balancing, and then we'll take it out for a drive. Looking forward to that. So as part of the service, we've done the ignition timing, we've checked everything else is okay. We've done a cylinder leak down test to make sure that each cylinder is, with the valves closed and the piston at the top of its stroke, that it's actually holding air. It's much more accurate than a compression test, spinning it over. And I also notice on this car something very interesting, that it's somebody at some stage has put on these spacer blocks between the carburettor and the inlet manifold. these aluminium extensions here, which look about 20 millimeters to me. And the point of those is that the carburetors are slightly further away from the inlet valve, and this was something that Lamborghini's test driver Bob Wallace sort of sprung upon in the late 60s. Not that you can say somebody who was as clever as he was springs upon things, but more discovers and researches them. But the actual point of these spacers is that it brings the carburetors slightly further away from the inlet valve. Not enough to cause a lack of throttle response because there's too much gas between here and the engine, but it gives a tiny bit of extra torque because the air coming through, the actual suction of that extra bit of air coming through the carburetor actually helps with mid-range torque, believe it or not. It actually gives the car a bit more mid-range torque. So the combination of the superleggera, or the very light chassis, and this is actually not the original engine. This is an engine out of a Miura S. So it's just slightly up on power, 10, 20 brake horsepower. But the combination of the light car plus a very lively engine should make for a very interesting test drive. So I'm just going to tune it now, and if we can balance a pound coin even for a few seconds on its edge, I'll be very happy that all cylinders are en concert, are playing in sympathy and in balance with each other. I've said this before, an engine is a big wind instrument, and all the ports, every valve, every bit of mixture from each carburetor in terms of fuel and air, about 14 points air to 1 point fuel, the stoichiometrically correct mixture. If all that is adhered to, the engine, the beauty of these is the engine is actually very smooth. It's very quiet mechanically, and it's very smooth. So I'll give it a tune up, and then we'll take this car out for a run. What is it like to drive a £1.5 million example of one of the most raw cars in terms of driver experience ever made? Well, let's find out. Well, here we are in the 23rd example of what was the expression supercar was coined with. This car, the 23rd, being very contentious here, ever supercar built. Of course, you got the Mercedes SSK, the Stutz Bearcat, the Mercedes Gullwing, all those things. So I am being very provocative there, but you get my point. This is one of the first handful of Miuras, and the interesting thing is, this is amazing how small things can make a difference. the Miuras from 1968 onwards had a thicker rimmed steering wheel than this with matte spokes. And it's not massively sunny today, but I have noticed when I've driven them in the sun more, these early cars, that this steering wheel is polished aluminium and it can really reflect the sun very strongly into your eyes. I can see why they changed it for a sort of satin finish on the later cars. It can be really quite horrendous, the sun shining in your face, which of course means you have to wear a pair of Renault Mustang sunglasses when you're driving them. It's not the day for sunglasses today, and I'd rather have all my wits about me in this 7-figure car, unfortunately, but we're just warming it through. Bit of gear whine from the transfer gears, which is not unusual, as Tom Jones would say, and the T's and P's are coming up nicely, temperatures and pressures, and I have to say this car feels very well planted on the road. I'd be interested to see once it's warmed up. It's a while since I've driven a car with those aluminium spacer blocks under the carburetors, and they do, it's sort of a win-win. They don't deter from the power at all, but they do give you a bit more mid-range torque because of the physics of the air going into the engine. They sort of act like a mini plenum chamber, which means you get more air inertia through the inlet induction system, and at certain revs that can give you more torque. It is, as I said earlier, it is funny the way the world changes, and the pecking order of desirability of different makes and models in relation to each other can change. It really is quite bizarre, but yeah, we're doing about 2,500 RPM now. I'm just going to try a little experiment first of all to see what that mid-range torque is like. Yeah. You can feel it. It is just a little more strong, around 3,000 RPM than, yeah. Very nice. However, we then have this. Oh yes. Not too shabby. Opening the taps on one of the most recognised and coveted supercars on the planet. Forget your modern hypercars. If you want visceral thrills at real world speeds, it does not get any better than this. Just fabulous. And you can actually feel this car, although I love Miura SVs, you can feel this car wriggling and writhing on the road. It's more alive. I can see why people are beginning to venerate these. You can feel, it's like driving, forgive the comparison, it's like driving a Lotus. You can feel the lightness. This car is super alive. Even the thinner steering wheel rim is more visceral, but it is very much alive, this car. And that mid-range throttle response, which really does make a difference. This is great. Very good. Absolutely alive. Delighted with this. Oh, that mid-range torque is so much more apparent than in other Miuras. It really is. What a killer combination. This extra torque, and I mean, it just comes with experience. When, as I said, when they first launched the Miura, Lamborghini were not expecting the tsunami of interest and orders that they got. So they just put it into production. They didn't bother about developing spaces for the carburetors for more torque. They just needed to get it over the line, and that they did. What an amazing car this is. Absolutely wonderful. Makes me want to burst into song. It's on days like these that I remember. We won't include. I can't compete with the Lamborghini V12. Why would I want to? This is where it's at, chaps. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be back with something else very soon.